Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so very much for joining us. Lots to talk about today. We'll get everyone's thoughts on the selection of Pope Francis and whether it has much impact on the day-to-day lives of Catholics in the United States. We'll talk about a situation in West Allis that has supporters of the concealed carry law saying this was exactly how it was supposed to work. And we'll talk about all the money going into developing the lakefront land in downtown Milwaukee. Let me introduce everyone. Longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, former broadcast journalist, political analyst. Oftentimes you hear him over on WISN Talk Radio. Denise Callaway, community affairs and public relations professional. And Gerard Randall, education consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about Pope Francis. First non-European pope in more than 1,000 years. First from Latin America. First Jesuit. The big question, does this really have much of an effect on the day-to-day lives of Catholics in America, or is he just a figurehead?
Ooh. Well, he's certainly beyond a figurehead. And I think he's going to continue theologically the direction that his predecessors, his last two predecessors, Benedict and John Paul II, had set. I think the cardinals in their wisdom chose someone that they had confidence in. It was a pretty fast conclave, and it didn't take them long to reach some consensus that this was the person that they wanted to lead the church. I think from newspaper accounts, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, he'd given a fairly impressive outline of the church's problems and what needed to be fixed. It's just that he doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of time. And so I think the impact is going to be felt quite quickly. If you look at Benedict and what everyday Catholics experience just in the change of the liturgy, those changes may have been modest changes, and for most they may have gone unnoticed, but if you were accustomed to rote in your part of the Mass, you kind of got a little jolt. Well, I think that what you're going to see with this new Pope who says he doesn't believe the Catholic Church is just another charitable work. It's got to be something beyond that. I think you're going to see a dramatic amount of change that the folks in the pews are going to experience.
Joel, when you saw this, did you think, same old, nice big procedure, or did you think, wow, maybe this guy is going to bring some major changes to the Catholic Church?
Well, I guess I didn't expect major changes. I mean, you go from an 85-year-old to a 76-year-old, and that's a youth movement, and you know, having pretty much the same kind of outlook on the fundamental philosophies of the religion that are way behind the world, you know, as far as women, as far as contraception and sexuality, you know, all those things. You don't expect very much to change there. But just the fact that it was a Jesuit who put, service to the poor very high. And when you say, will it affect American Catholics, I think for the most part, American Catholics have been kind of, distanced from Rome anyway, because, they do go their own way, in contraception and sexuality and are far more, progressive on women's issues and gay issues, things like that. But it certainly puts the American Catholic representatives in politics in an odd place. When at the same time when these the Rick Santorums and Paul Ryans of the world are kind of turning their back on the poor and wanting to do all they can for the rich. This Pope represents just the opposite of that. But the fact that American Catholics, and I guess increasingly European Catholics, are not really following this conservative dogma coming out of the church, I don't expect that to change very much.
Kevin, this guy is pretty conservative.
Yes, he is. And that could be to his advantage, I believe. There's a chasm in amongst today's Catholics. You have the social justice Catholics, and then you have the traditional theological conservative Catholics. There's a gap there. Now, this Pope Francis has a tremendous affinity and love and embraces the poor. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's number one. Number two, he also is very principled You're not going to see any radical change from the dogma and principles of the Roman Catholic faith. You put those two together and it's a pretty strong combination, and he may be able to fuse or start to fuse that gap between the factions of the Catholics that I described. I mean, you see that he is the epitome of humility, and he began almost immediately. The guy lives in an apartment. He cooks his own food. He shuns a limousine and takes a taxi or a minibus instead. At 76, he lugs his own baggage. So I think, and he has a sense of humor too. When he was elected, he told the conclave, "May God have mercy on your souls for what you've just done." Mm-hmm. So I think he's going to work out very well. It was like a rock concert the other day to see the outpouring of love and support for this man. But I thought they were going to go with a younger guy. My guess is he's not going to be around much longer, and will just be, I know he's more in the figurehead, you're right, but he's going to be a caretaker for a while before the next one comes in.
Denise, do you find it interesting how fascinated the media is with this entire process?
Well, I mean, I think I do, but when we're talking about, a billion people, centuries-old tradition that's shrouded with the doors of the Sistine Chapel closing and, the smoke, and I think it is very much a ritual that is at the same time familiar, but still something that we still kind of struggle to kind of understand and see. So I think that's part of it. I really think it's very interesting, the choice that the Cardinals made for Pope Francis. I mean, what does that tell us? I think there are a couple of things. Clearly there was a division between the Romans and the Reformers. And part of the division was the Romans really did not want to see much change in terms of the internal workings of the Vatican, which we now all know due to the leaks and papers that came out, it's troubled. So I think to pick someone, I think to pick someone who is more of a reformer from that sense of the way you were looking at it, shows that the Cardinals realize that there's a problem and they've got to get it cleaned up. The other thing that I think is really interesting about the way, what we've been told about the Pope, I mean, whether or not we like to think of it this way, there's a little bit of marketing of the Pope that's going on in terms of what we do and don't know about him. Some of what we're learning about him and what's being disclosed about him sounds an awful lot like John Paul II, where it was an idea of, here's a guy who used to go skiing, he likes to do this, he likes to do that. Very much, I think, trying to create that image of someone who is the people's Pope, perhaps more so than the Vatican's Pope or the Cardinal's Pope. So I think it's really interesting. Clearly, there's been this appeal that has been created about him, that he's a man of the people who's very modest. And I think the effort behind that is it really lets people, including those who may not believe with all the doctrines of the church, that this is a nice guy and maybe I ought to give him a chance.
Well, the Pope chose his name because he was heavily influenced by St. Francis of Assisi.
And Francis Xavier as well.
And Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal this week made this observation that St. Francis one day felt the need to go into church and prayed before an image of the crucified and heard a voice say to him, "Go fix my house. It's in need of repair." And he heard this voice say that 3 times. So I think this Pope realizes that, yes, scandals have rocked the church. They need to get beyond that, fix that. And I think the mission is clear for him that he will, like Francis of Assisi was told, go fix my house, it's in need of repair. And I think he's going to do his darndest to do that.
And he's very much speaks the words and speaks like an evangelist. That, he is someone who's talking about we need to go out and do God's work. We need to be God's image. And I think that's something, particularly if we take a look at the areas where the Catholic Church is seeing its greatest growth in Central and South America, in Africa, where it is very much an evangelical feel, which is different from what we experience in the United States and in Europe. I think that's really an appeal that will serve the church well.
How about a leader that's not self-effacing? How often do you see that? Never.
But the one thing you said about reform, it seemed to me, as the reporting on this selection, you know, reporters were making stuff up. They didn't know who front runners were, and they didn't.
The only one who knew was Dolan, who correctly predicted it. Everyone else was wrong.
But it did seem in some of the discussions that when they were talking about reform among the cardinals, they were mostly concerned about reforming the bureaucracy of the Vatican.
Right.
You know, I think when ordinary people talk about reform in the church, they're thinking about other
Women playing a greater role.
Women are talking about the scandal, the child predator scandal, and I'm not so sure that anyone in the hierarchy is very eager to get involved in that.
I think it'll depend on who the first half dozen new cardinals that he names. His first consistory, where they come together, the new cardinals that he selects, when they bring them together to give them their new assignments, I think what you're going to find is that he will have left his stamp on the church by that first group of new leadership, and most of them will be over.
If you're looking for major radical reform that has been mentioned on this program already, I don't see that happening in the very near future. Maybe, and that's maybe with a capital M, down the road years from now, but that's not going to happen, I don't think, during this Pope's
The other
lifetime.
younger cardinals, I mean, who appointed them? Pope Benedict did. So, you know, you don't appoint someone who doesn't share at the very core your same philosophical beliefs.
All right, next topic. Did you see the story the other day about the guy in West Allis who was driving down the street, saw another guy beating up a woman? So he pulls his car over, pulls out his gun, pulls out his phone call, calls the police, and then follows the guy on foot until the cops get there. Is he a hero or an idiot?
Well, I want to answer your first question. Did I see the story? Yeah, everyone sees those stories, and we're going to see those stories for a while. Every time somebody like that does something, it's going to be made a big story, and some people are going to say, see, that works. But just think of what this city would be like if everybody was jumping out of their cars with guns and trying to get involved in fights between two other people who don't have guns. You know, the fact that this was a brutality to a woman, even though these people were in a relationship, you know, people say, well, good, I'm glad he did that. But I don't think entering guns into, you know, violent confrontations is an acceptable thing myself. I don't want to live in that kind of a world where, you know, you don't know who's going to pop up, not knowing what's going on in a situation, with a gun to try to solve it with a gun. That just makes me very uncomfortable.
Kevin, a lot of the people who really support concealed carry say this is exactly how it was supposed to work.
Bingo. And you are going to hear more stories like this in the future, because this is happening. We don't have the wild, wild west that opponents of concealed carry have always said will happen if you enact these laws. That's not happening.
You got a guy jumping out with a gun?
Well, no, he jumped out, and first he said to the guy to knock it off. He told him to stop. And then then came the or else, and no shots were fired. He called the police, held the criminal at bay until the police came, and then cooperated with police, said, go ahead, take a look. And my permit's in my wallet. He stood with his hands up in the air, said, go ahead. And he's a hero in my book. He probably saved that woman's life. And this is exactly why we let honest, decent, law-abiding, well-trained citizens have the right to carry, because they can and do save their own lives and other people's lives. And again, he's a hero in my book, and this is exactly why these laws are on the books in practically every state in America.
Denise, do we want to see a lot more of this?
No, and here's the reason why. This gentleman was not your average citizen with a concealed carry permit. Former military, trained in the use of weapons, trained in how you approach a situation that's a potentially dangerous situation. 99% of the people who are out there with concealed carry do not have that kind of training. Regardless of that being the case, and yes, to come to the aid of this woman, absolutely the appropriate thing to do, or anyone else where you see this kind of situation.
You should get an award from the city of Milwaukee.
Well, you've already talked, let me finish. The thing that you want to be able to ask is, what was really the best weapon that he had? Was it the gun that was in one hand or the cell phone that was in the other hand that allowed him to call the police? It was that cell phone. Because
And in
if
the
you take a
meantime, he
look at
keeps kicking her in the
gosh,
head.
For goodness sakes.
This isn't Captain May I. This is a
No, it's
dialogue.
not Captain May I, but it is the chance for people to be able to finish a sentence. And I know when you don't disagree with stuff, you like to interrupt, so I guess we know you don't agree with this. But the other thing that you have to realize is that if you ask police officers what the most dangerous situation is that they walk into and what scares them the most, it's a domestic violence situation. So we're very fortunate that nothing went wrong and that this woman at the end of the day was protected and this individual was arrested. But let's not pretend like this guy is the poster child for concealed carry, because he is not the typical person out there with concealed carry. Most people with concealed carry are not trained like this gentleman was.
He didn't shoot the guy, but he said he was prepared to if he had to. Would it have been a different story then? Would people have been shocked? Or would they still
but
be
that
thinking-
didn't happen, Dan.
If he had shot and had been shot back at, or if there had been any kind of altercation from the assailant that led to his getting shot. I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this. I think what the guy did that was beating up on the woman was absolutely reprehensible. That's the first thing. And I suppose any woman in my life, or any other woman for that matter, that was being assaulted in that way, I'd want someone to step forward and stop the beating. Second part, with regards to the guns, I'm not so sure that if it had just been the telephone, that would have been sufficient. I guess that piece we'll never know. I do know that it worked out the right way. It didn't end up being a situation where there was a gunfight, that the woman was hurt even further, or that someone ended up dead as a result. I do believe that Sheriff Clark had it on target when he said those folk who are carrying concealed weapons ought to make sure that they're properly trained, so that there are more instances, if you're going to have these courageous folks step forward and carry guns, there are more instances of where people are better trained as opposed to untrained that step into those kinds of situations. I do think you're going to see very few of those situations where people, even when they're carrying a gun, will want to step forward into altercations. I just don't see that happening. And the ones who are more likely are the ones who probably won't.
We do know that this was a violent assailant.
Right.
But there was only one person there with a deadly weapon. And I just prefer fewer deadly weapons in public than, I don't like people beating up each other in public either, or beating on women in public, but I just don't think introducing a deadly weapon into the situation increases safety.
Sure worked here.
In fact, it could have led to a loss of life.
All right, next topic. The city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, and the state of Wisconsin the other day jointly announced a multi-million-dollar plan to move roads, streets, freeway entrances to free up land and accommodate redevelopment at the lakefront in downtown Milwaukee, pretty much like at the end of Wisconsin Avenue. Two questions. Does this benefit all of Milwaukee, or just the rich folks who will live in whatever condos they develop there? And if Barrett and Walker hate each other so much and never cooperate, how are they able to get this done?
This was one of, I think, the best economic development decisions that's happened for the city in this sense. It was small investment overall. What you're basically talking about is moving some roadways in order to free up more land. A lot of it, the old coach yards that the county had, the parking spaces, which some had been a part of the coach yards, which now the Italian Community Center has. There had already been lots of condo development down there. The museum complex, which is there, this opens up more opportunity for people to go down and more easily access the museums that are there. And of course, Northwestern Mutual and the other office tower that's being planned, I think those facilities will be the anchors for more business development down on the east end of Wisconsin Avenue and just further to the south. So what the state, county, city did was finally come to some agreement as to what ought to happen with those roadways and who should bear the cost, and it's being split, it's being shared, who should bear the cost for that. If it had been something different, I think there rightly would have been some hackles raised because they didn't talk about going forward who's going to have access to that land for development. They didn't talk about whether or not there would be a very narrow process for providing for the sale of those lands or for the leasing of those lands. They didn't even talk about what other kinds of government processes like DNR being engaged was going to be. They kept it focused. They kept the amount of money that's going to be invested in all of this to a manageable stream, and the cooperation, I hope, will signal future cooperation going forward.
Michael Cudahy said this is going to change Milwaukee. Is that an exaggeration?
No, I don't think it is, because when we think about Milwaukee, one of the things that really comes to our mind is the lakefront. It's our greatest natural resource, and I think it is going to change Milwaukee. I agree with Gerard. I think this is perhaps a move we don't understand to its absolute fullest now, but I think it has the potential to be an absolutely great economic boon for the city. The thing that I think is remarkable about it is that you probably could not put 3 politicians from the state in a room who would disagree any more than the 3 of them would. But
especially around transportation.
yes, but it does show that when there is an opportunity that people can begin to visualize, talk about, that you can find cooperation that lets something good happen for the city of Milwaukee. And quite frankly, with all the bashing that was going on in Madison around the city and what the city could or couldn't do, I think what this shows is that when Madison is willing to work with the city and work with the county, good things can happen for the citizens of Milwaukee. And because Milwaukee is what it is, that's good news for the rest of the state as well.
When you saw the picture of Barrett, Abele, and Walker, you did look at that picture going, wow, you know they don't like each other.
Well, but I think what it really says, and I'm not disagreeing with either of those two, but money talks. It really does. Money and economic development can bring very disparate political personalities together. You mentioned, first of all, you started out with Walker and
Barrett.
Tom Barrett, but I think Abele was actually one of the driving forces of this, starting out with the couture, which he proposed on county land, and then this seems to be an extension of that. And you know, there's some progressive people that are upset about the couture. You know, that this office tower on what they claim is lake, not just lakefront, but lake, right. Because they filled in the lake there. But that part of the lakefront and the natural extension south from Wisconsin Avenue is right now so underutilized as parking lots that to be able to use it for high-end economic development is an excellent
There will be a ripple
move.
effect.
Yeah.
This development comes on the heels of 3, outstanding private developments. So you're going to see retail, museums, hotel rooms, rental units, apartments, and that will only spur even more development and, more important than all that, jobs.
All right. Well, it's certainly been a news-packed week. There was so much stuff going on. And since we couldn't possibly fit it all into one little half-hour program, Rick Horowitz thought he'd pick up some of the space in just, 2 minutes. He's primed for action at the interCHANGE anchor desk. Rick.
At the bottom of the hour, here's the top of the news. President Obama has wrapped up his Capitol Hill charm offensive, meeting separately with House and Senate Republicans and Democrats. One reported highlight of the meetings, Speaker Boehner's pledge to, quote, end the animosity. The president's response, you're likable enough, John. At the CPAC convention just outside Washington, some of the GOP's biggest names debated where they went wrong last November and how to pick a better standard bearer for 2016. They say they're looking for a bedrock conservative who's good with budgets, strong on tactics, and comfortable in front of the cameras. For now, they're calling their prototype candidate Ayn Rand Paul Ryan Seacrest. Congressman Ryan, meanwhile, is out this week with the new GOP budget plan. It promises to balance the budget in just 10 years by eliminating Obamacare, voucherizing Medicare, and turning Medicaid funding into block grants to the states. Other key provisions repeal gravity and delete the year 2012. Caught by surprise when their upbeat forecast didn't pan out on election night, GOP officials now pledge to review their polling operations. In one recent survey, 85% of Republicans said that accurate poll numbers were, quote, very important to the party's future. 42% disagreed. Texas Senator Ted Cruz again rejecting the notion that his hard-edged questioning style is reminiscent of the infamous Joe McCarthy. Said Cruz, "That's totally ridiculous, and I have in my hand a list of 57 experts who agree with me." More efforts to expand the brand. GOP Party Chairman Reince Priebus traveled to Brooklyn this week to woo black voters. Priebus called his trip a great success, showing reporters a Brooklyn Nets basketball jersey and a contract to purchase a nearby bridge. And finally, world reaction still mostly positive following the surprise choice of Argentine Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio as the first Jesuit ever to head the Catholic Church. Not nearly as surprising, though, as the Cardinal's rumored first pick, who would have been a rare Jewish pontiff, Pope Sigal I. That's all for now. Go make your own news.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, happy St. Patrick's Day, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.